In ancient Egypt, a legendary pharaoh is running out of time to complete his pyramid.
What we're seeing is just the core.
Now, Egyptologists have made a discovery that exposes how he finished it.
It tells us the untold stories.
And the incredible life of one worker.
This was an elite job. This is something that they were proud of.
What happens when a king dies? What secrets does a mysterious mummy hide? At the heart of the Great Pyramid
We have to go up at a crawl.
is an ambitious pharaoh who will transform Egypt. The story of the pyramids is one of innovation,
It was a resurrection machine.
mysterious rituals,
These are things that help the deceased re-energize and live for eternity.
back-breaking work, and palace intrigue. Unlock the deepest secrets of the pharaohs.
Every mummy is different. You never know exactly what to expect.
Explore the lives of ancient workers and uncover the remarkable story of Egypt's old kingdom.
Not only did ancient Egypt make the pyramids made ancient Egypt.
In ancient Egypt, builders are hard at work constructing the largest pyramid on the planet for their pharaoh Khufu. The Great Pyramid. To achieve his dream, Khufu has formed a professional workforce, bolstered by conscripted citizens, and built a vast city to support them. But the pharaoh's ambition could be his downfall. The pyramid is a giant tomb designed to transport him to the afterlife. If the immense project is not completed when he dies, he can't guarantee that his successor will finish it for him. And his dreams of immortality could be dashed. So how will Khufu complete his pyramid? And what will happen when he dies? Archaeologist Mark Lehner has spent decades hunting for clues about Khufu's intentions for his monument.
Khufu's builders would never have imagined that we would see the pyramid the way we see it today, because what we're seeing is just the core. It looks fairly regular from a distance, but when you come up close, the stones are not well cut, they don't join well together, it's just the mass.
The Great Pyramid, as we see it today, is incomplete. To build the monument as fast as possible, Khufu uses some 2.3 million blocks of roughly cut limestone for the core. But at the base of the pyramid, Marcus spotted evidence that the pharaoh's master plan was much more ambitious. Clues that expose the craftsmanship of the builders.
Here we have an idea of what Khufu's pyramid must have looked like when it was brand new. It was covered with polished white limestone casing. And here's where Khufu's masons did their stonework with finesse to perfection. Not only are they making casing with 17-ton block, but they're putting the blocks together, like here in the pavement slab, with joins so fine that you can't get a razor blade in between. And they've made that fine join all the way back as long as a meter 20. It's just astounding what they accomplished here.
Khufu wanted his pyramid to have a seamless white outer casing for a very special reason. To understand, we need to see the finished Great Pyramid as the Egyptians did, by traveling 4,500 years back in time.
When the pyramid was completed, you have to imagine that it was gleaming white, this fine, fine white limestone that made up the casing, that made it smooth. It would have gleamed under the sun, it would have sparkled for miles.
The glittering white pyramid reflected the light of the sun god Ra, acting as a beacon between the earthly world and the afterlife.
The word for bright in Egyptian is the same as the word for white. It's a hedge. So having something that is white means in a sort of hieroglyphic way that it is bright, that it is glowing, it is shining.
It was a dazzling place at that time, a very magical, a spiritual place, almost merging with the other world, the celestial world of the sun and the stars.
Khufu needed his pyramid to be perfect in every way, linking him directly to the gods he wished to join.
A pyramid essentially is a regeneration machine for the king. The king goes in as a mummy, as a dead body, and through the pyramidal structure, he is then reborn into the afterlife.
Khufu believes after he dies that he will resurrect and join the gods forever.
So for Khufu, the gleaming outer casing of the pyramid, hiding the rough inner core, was a crucial part of his machine. Today, the blocks of white limestone, polished by the builders, have all but vanished. Just a small section remains.
The robbing started in the Pharaonic period, but especially in the Middle Ages, we know the stones were destroyed for the manufacture of lime mortar.
But these white stones have an important story to tell about the final step in Khufu's ambitious project. It's special rock called Tura limestone, because it comes from quarries at a place called Tura on the other side of the Nile. Khufu's father used stone from the Tura quarries to encase his bent pyramid. The bent pyramid still has almost 70% of its outer casing, making it the best example of what the covering of Khufu's Great Pyramid once looked like. But Khufu's pyramid is far bigger.
The construction site of the Great Pyramid was very huge. It was the largest construction site ever at that time for a building.
To finish the monument, builders will need to haul some 70,000 casing blocks, weighing an average of 2.5 tons each, from 10 miles away. So how did the Egyptians transport these precious limestone blocks to finish off the pyramid? Now, archaeologists have unearthed astonishing evidence that may answer that question. The discovery was made 150 miles from the pyramid at Wadi El Jarf on the Red Sea coast. In 2013, Egyptologist Pierre Tallet and his team found 31 caverns dug into the hillside. Hieroglyphs on the walls show that they date to the time of pyramid building. 3 years of research later, they made the discovery of the century.
It was in a pit at the entrance of one of the caverns that we discovered more than 1,000 papyrus fragments.
Pierre had uncovered the oldest papyrus manuscript ever found in Egypt, protected from the elements for 4,500 years underneath a large stone block.
A discovery like that, I think you only make once in your lifetime. It was magnificent. We could never have dreamed of finding such a complete document.
Now, Pierre has deciphered the hieroglyphs and discovered something remarkable. It was written by someone working directly on Khufu's pyramid.
The discovery was absolutely earth-shattering because for the first time we have a ledger, a record from the reign of Khufu that talks about the resources and the moving of resources for the Great Pyramid.
This discovery is about to rewrite history. In Egypt, archaeologists have unearthed an incredible ancient document.
This discovery changes our understanding of the Great Pyramid and how it was built, because it's an unofficial document and it tells us the untold stories about how the pyramid was built.
The papyrus was written some 4,500 years ago, during the reign of the pharaoh Khufu. Its author is a man called Merer. He leads a team known as a file, loading limestone blocks at the port of the Tura quarries. These are the high-quality white blocks that will encase the Great Pyramid. They are the crucial final part of the monument's construction that will complete Khufu's tomb.
The Merer papyrus is great because it unpacks what this file, what men under Merer's supervision would do.
It's one of those moments where you get a glimpse into history by somebody who is actually participating in one of the largest building projects ever from the ancient world.
Merer keeps a meticulous logbook of his daily work as his crew load the blocks and ship them across the Nile. But where exactly are they taking them? Today, the Great Pyramid sits high and dry 5 miles from the Nile.
What has long been debated is whether the Nile was actually on the west in the Old Kingdom. What seems clear to me is that at least one branch of the Nile was very close, maybe as close as 300 or 400 meters.
The theory about the Nile once being closer is supported by drilling samples. The river provided the perfect route for Merer to get near Giza with his precious load. Even so, the job must have required tremendous organization.
Merer is a low-ranking civil servant who leads a team of about 40 men. His team make regular boat trips to transport loads of limestone blocks from the Tura quarries, where they're extracted, to the construction site of Khufu's pyramid.
According to Merer's logbook, he spends an average of 2 days loading the 75 tons of stones that his boat can carry. Every 10 days, he makes at least 2 rotations between the quarries and the pyramid site. In total, 170,000 tons of limestone needed to be transported to cover the tomb of Khufu, requiring many teams like Merer's.
The gigantic size of these monuments is not due to the gigantic size of the workforce, but to the repetition and tenacity of the workers. Their jobs are carried out according to plans that are perfectly executed. Day after day, Merer reports what he did during the day and where he sleeps at night. So it's actually a very detailed record of information using almost military precision.
While deciphering the papyrus, Pierre discovers that this information is intended for Merer's superiors. Mer needs to account for his time.
These logbooks expose the control by the monarchy over the working time of these teams. They're at the service of the king 24 hours a day, and for the whole year.
Just gives us a window into the incredible bureaucracy that was used to create the pyramids. In fact, Mer was accounting for his time in half days, which is quite interesting. I mean, they really literally down to the minute.
More than anything, the Merer Papyrus shows us how carefully the ancient Egyptians kept accounts of everything they did. And that tells us a lot about why Egypt was so successful. They kept records, they kept track of everything, and if you're keeping track of everything, then it's a little harder for a corrupt official to skim off the top.
It's a precise system. Mer can't afford any delays, otherwise work on the pyramid could grind to a halt. Thanks to efficient organization and rigorous control of thousands of workers, Khufu sets up an unprecedented production line to try to complete his immense tomb before his death. But the pharaoh also knows he must reward his men to ensure their motivation.
We found a very beautiful accounting papyrus where we have records of grains, flour, barley, dates, which are used to pay the workers.
Merer records the payments in red and black ink. In a red column, Merer lists the payment that is delayed.
It's clear that the royal administration never provides everything that's owed to the workers. There are salary delays.
Merer doesn't record how he or his team feel about the delays in their pay. But thanks to his newly unearthed logbooks, archaeologists are closer than ever to understanding the day-to-day life of pyramid workers. They've even found jars near the papyrus tagged with what could be Merer's team name, Khufu's Escorts.
It gives us this interesting snapshot from late in the reign of Khufu. Merer dates to about year 26 or 27 of Khufu. So Merer is probably seeing the final work on the Great Pyramid.
Merer and his fellow escorts know the pyramid is almost complete, but they also know that Khufu is getting older, and there are some things they can't control.
Moving large blocks of stone would not have been possible over long distances were it not for the Nile. That said, the Nile is not perfect. During the high flood or the low Nile, it would have been difficult for large ships to sail up and down the river.
For Khufu, any delay could be fatal. Ancient boatman Merer is shipping in high-quality limestone blocks to complete the Great Pyramid. To keep work on schedule, he needs to drop them off close to the building site. But the Nile's level fluctuates during the year, making it impossible to get close enough during some months. So typically, Khufu engineers a solution, one that will transform this landscape.
When Khufu came to build his pyramid up on the plateau, the only place for him and his workforce to bring stone in and up to the plateau was in this area. And so we think that Khufu created a loading bay.
First, they build a dam next to the river, and then dig a canal to divert water from the river to a gigantic artificial basin. Then they open the sluices to allow boats like Merer's to dock a few hundred feet from the construction site.
The Egyptians were brilliant at being able to work with canals and dikes and create an area where they knew that always they would have a certain level of water during a particular period of time.
Those projects were very important because through them they could transport all the necessary materials for building the pyramid.
Thanks to the work of archaeologists, we can now visualize Khufu's pyramid harbor. The artificial dock, where Merer delivers his cargo of limestone blocks, sits next to a vast city that Khufu built to house his workforce. Two vital pieces of infrastructure which are key to pyramid building.
The papyri of Merer really prove that you could go from the Tura quarries to the building site of the pyramid itself without having to leave the water. Because that is going to cost less money, fewer men, fewer resources, and enable the Egyptians to build the pyramid much more quickly.
Merer's logbooks remain the greatest discovery of the 21st century for understanding the lives of individual pyramid builders.
It's really clear that by working with these boats that this was an elite job. This is something that they were proud of. This is not just common labor. This is something that probably some of these men aspired to.
But Merer and his team are just one cog in a much larger pyramid building machine.
You have the people who have to move the stones. You have the people who have to quarry the stones. And then you have to have the massive agricultural base to feed and clothe and house all of the people engaged in these activities.
Khufu is operating a huge industrial network. From the Nile Delta, he sources food for his builders. From Aswan, he brings granite for his burial chamber. From the Sinai, shipments of copper. Cedar wood is imported from what is now Lebanon.
These networks, as well as the internal colonization of Egypt, whole new farms and ranches and plantations for feeding the workforce that was here in the lost city of the pyramids, all of these networks, all of this national infrastructure became more important than the reason for which it was created, building these gigantic pyramids.
Some 25 years after laying the foundations, and thanks to the mobilization of all his people, Khufu can finally admire his life's work, the largest Egyptian pyramid that will ever exist.
It would have been amazing to see the sun shine down and for that light to be reflected back to the viewer.
You have to understand that the pyramid was a resurrection machine, and to the pharaoh, it symbolized the mound of creation from which the sun rose. And this particular form was equated with the sun god Ra, and so therefore the symbolic form came to mean the transcendence of the king's body, as well as the eternal celebration of the king's cult.
But the finished pyramid is just one part of the resurrection process.
Without rituals, without offerings, the pyramid itself is a pile of stones for nothing.
If the king is to be successfully transported to the afterlife, he'll need to undergo a series of important rituals when he dies. Around 2483 BC, the Great Pyramid of Giza is complete, and the time has come to put it to use. Khufu, the most ambitious pharaoh of Egypt, dies, aged in his 50s or 60s. He's about to find out if the resurrection machine he's built really works. 2 of his 14 children are at his side. Jedefre, the next in line to the throne, but also Khafre, who will eventually reign over Egypt too. The pharaoh's remains will rest for 2 days before a process known by the Egyptians since the dawn of time: mummification.
The idea of mummification began in Egypt long time ago before the pyramids were built.
You would be buried far from the Nile, far from the floodplain, out in the desert. Everything is dry, natural desiccation.
Inspired by the natural preservation of bodies in the desert, the Egyptians developed mummification. The ritual lasts 70 days. To accompany the ceremony, embalmers recite prayers and instructions that guide the process. A series of rites that must be carried out to perfection. Because if the body is not well preserved, Khufu will not be able to resurrect.
The Egyptians have something called the Ba, which is your soul. It can be envisaged as a Ba bird with a human head. It's the soul that can cross the boundary of this world and the next. And there's something called a Ka. It's a type of double of the person.
Ra will escort the pharaoh's Ba soul towards the setting sun. There, it will join the other world and start a journey that will lead Khufu to eternal life. To prevent the body from decomposing from the inside, all organs except the heart must be removed. Using a long bronze hook, the master embalmer begins to remove the brain.
The brain could be removed in a number of ways. One popular way is to break the nasal septum, put a little hooked metal thing in there and sort of turn the brains into scrambled eggs and let them come out the nose in little gooey chunks.
He pulls the brain through the nose and throws it away.
For ancient Egyptians, the brain was not important at all because the place of knowledge, feeling, wisdom was the heart.
The embalmer makes an incision to remove the organs: the lungs, stomach, intestines, and liver. The operation is carried out with extreme care. If the heart is accidentally cut free, it is sometimes stitched back into place.
The heart was all the time remaining inside the body.
When the internal organs are removed, they're placed into these 4 jars called canopic jars, and their heads are different animals.
When Khufu comes back to life, he will be able to retrieve his vital organs. The embalmers then dehydrate the pharaoh's remains using natron, a salt that will dry the body for 40 days. In the last step of the mummification ritual, they cover the king's body with strips of linen dipped in a mixture of resins, oils, and honey.
And part of the wrapping process would also include, as we know from later mummies, the inclusion of a number of amulets in the wrapping. So the wrapping of the mummy is a ritual of its own.
The amulets are magical and will help the king overcome challenges on his journey to the afterlife. This process will last 15 days and may require up to 4,000 square feet of linen. Over centuries, the knowledge of Egyptian embalmers grew and mummification techniques evolved. The Institute of Evolutionary Medicine in Zurich is one of the world's most advanced research centers for the study of mummification. At this facility, Frank Rulli analyzes Egyptian mummies to discover how ancient embalmers tried to make the deceased immortal.
We are looking for the way it was mummified. We are looking for individual data which help us to write the biography of the person, like sex, age, but also the diseases, the degree of preservation. It's very nicely wrapped. It's the typical kind of wrapping with the head and the feet being so prominent. So it's probably about roughly 2,000 years old.
The researchers will perform a series of scans and examinations. Their objective is to understand the specific technique used by the embalmers. The first mystery to solve is who is hiding under all these layers of linen.
Every mummy is different, so it's like every time opening a Christmas gift, you don't know what to expect. It looks like rather a young individual.
Young adult.
Young adult, and probably female based on the pelvis. Here we have the hands in front of the pelvis, and this is a very dense material. So it's probably a ring.
So it's most likely a jewelry, a ring.
Mm-hmm.
As the practice of mummification progressed, more people could afford the process.
In the Old Kingdom, time of the pyramid builders, it was more of an elite way of treating the bodies, whereas later on it was more of a democratization. So more and more people actually were able to be at least partially mummified.
As mummification became more widespread, it drove the emergence of more sophisticated techniques, notably in the products used for preservation.
They often use bitumen. They have resins, conifer resins, for example, beeswax. There are multiple components, up to several thousand components. That changed over time, and that probably changed also between different tissue types. More in the later periods, like New Kingdom, end of the New Kingdom, they actually put the material under the skin to actually give a bit more of a life-like appearance.
This woman was mummified some 2,500 years after the pharaoh Khufu. It's proof of just how important the ancient Egyptians believed mummification to be. After 70 days, Khufu's mummification ritual is complete, and he is placed in a cedar wood sarcophagus. He will soon be taken to his gigantic tomb to be reborn in the afterlife. But first, the priest calls the Ka of the pharaoh, the part of the soul that stays in his mummy, to prayer. A final blessing, which the Egyptians call the opening of the mouth ceremony. priest touches the eyes, mouth, nose, and ears of Khufu, painted onto the coffin.
And this causes the senses of the mummy to return in the afterlife so that they're able to see and eat and drink and hear.
Once this ritual is over, Khufu can be brought to his final resting place.
Khufu's body wouldn't just be dried and then stuck into the pyramid and locked up, but the entire process is this long event over several weeks, a ritual process where the pyramid is really functioning. It's the machine that's being started to propel the ruler into the afterlife.
According to ancient beliefs, the body of the pharaoh must remain intact in order to resurrect. So Khufu will need to protect his body from looters. Clues to how he did this lie inside the last secrets of the Great Pyramid. At Egypt's Great Pyramid, Egyptologist Mark Lehner is investigating how Khufu's mummified body was hauled into position and protected. He gets access through a tunnel carved by robbers.
The story is that the tunnel was forced by people who wanted to get into the pyramid in 800 and something AD, and that they turned here, maybe hearing something that led them to think the passage system was here.
When Khufu was buried here, priests had to first haul his sarcophagus down an 80-foot tunnel to reach what we now call the ascending corridor.
The ascending passage goes up into the pyramid at about 26 degrees for 38 meters, only 1.2 meters high and 1.05 meters wide. So we have to go up at a crawl. Can you imagine the king's funeral coming up such a narrow tube like this?
After hoisting the sarcophagus 125 feet, they arrive in the Grand Gallery.
You're in the Grand Gallery. One of the real marvels of the ancient engineering architectural world. It's not only 24 feet high, but it's angled up at 26 degrees, still the same slope as the ascending passage. Some Egyptologists think that Khufu's engineers stored granite plugging blocks in this channel. And then when they wanted to close the pyramid from above, men released brake logs that held the plugging blocks back. And the plug blocks slid down the channel right into the ascending passage. There's only one problem. If Khufu's workers plugged the ascending passage from inside, from up in the Grand Gallery, how did they get out? Well, there is their escape route. There's a shaft that goes down to what's called the grotto at ground level, and then another shaft that goes down to the descending passage, and then on out to the outside of the pyramid.
To reach the king's final resting place, workers need to haul the sarcophagus another 150 feet up the Grand Gallery towards an antechamber, where there is another defense system.
They put in place portcullis slabs. They're slabs that slid down these grooves that were created by leaving bars of raised granite. So the slabs slid down these grooves, 1, 2, 3, probably with a great boom. and sealing up the chamber that lies just beyond here.
Behind this last corridor is the king's chamber.
I've been coming here for 46 years, and yet every time I come into this room, I still have a feeling of a very special place.
This is where the king should have rested for eternity. But today, all that remains is an empty sarcophagus. Despite all the pharaoh's protection, the burial chamber was looted. Robbers chiseled their way through the defenses.
Somebody knew just where to come. In that case, it would have been an inside job. Somebody very close to the time when the pyramid was finished.
The construction of the burial chamber is more evidence of Khufu's ambition. The entire room, from floor to ceiling, is made from red granite. These immense blocks come from the Aswan quarries more than 500 miles away. To support more than 300 feet of stone above the chamber, the builders had to innovate. Khufu's architects built chambers to relieve the pressure, topped by angled slabs called a chevron vault. Ancient builders made other decisions for spiritual rather than engineering reasons. They made two tiny passages, about 6 inches wide, stretching over 200 feet from the king's burial chamber to the sky.
With a high probability, they are not channels to conduct air in here. They are channels for the king's soul to come out of his sarcophagus, through the northern channel, up to the northern sky, and to join the circumpolar stars. Everything about the pyramid suggests, in one sense, it was a primitive spiritual machine. It was a resurrection machine. Because if you can get the king to be reborn again and to join the other gods and stars, the entire court, his whole household, which was all of Egypt, would survive the afterlife with him.
Today, Khufu's pyramid may be empty, but Egyptologists have no doubt he intended it as his final resting place.
It should not surprise us that after 4,500 years, no mummies have actually been found in Old Kingdom pyramids. However, we have abundant evidence that pyramids were tombs. We have hieroglyphic texts that say, in no uncertain terms, that the mummy of the king was buried in the pyramid.
After years of hard work and sacrifice, the builders and the king's high dignitaries pay a last tribute to Khufu, the most ambitious pharaoh of Egypt. Khufu is thought to have reigned for about 27 years. Most of them spent building what will remain the tallest monument on the planet for almost 4,000 years.
Khufu rebranded Egyptian kingship. He erected the largest pyramid in Egypt, which showed the power of the pharaoh. It also symbolized the organization that was required to build something like that, the expert workforce, the resources that were needed.
He inherits an incredibly well-functioning country from his father and leaves it, if anything, functioning even better. The bureaucracy is growing even larger, and he has created the single largest man-made structure of antiquity on the Giza Plateau.
Creating the pyramids, building the pyramids, quarrying the stone, brought together Egypt, unified the country, and gave the nation a project that defined in some ways what it was to be an Egyptian, to contribute to your king's final resting place.
Khufu had created a city for his workforce, diverted the Nile, and developed an immense industrial and commercial network. Never again in history will a pharaoh be able to match the scale of the Great Pyramid. But the era of the pyramid builders is not over. The Giza Plateau will see yet more monumental constructions.